Okay, this video is going to serve as your homework for Tuesday, October 9th, and leading into really Wednesday, October 10th, depending on when you watch it. And really, I wanted just to accomplish a couple of things. The basic goal, and it's different than what this question says, but the basic goal is this. So we have this transition in power from Washington to Adams, which was kind of bumpy. Now we're going to get a second transition in power from Adams to Jefferson. And we know that that is significant because it's not just Adams to Jefferson, it's Federalists to Democratic Republicans. And what we're going to have to answer is, how does Jefferson respond to constitutional questions as President of the United States, keeping in mind what his philosophy was? Does he stay true to his philosophy, or does he have to do things a little bit differently because he's now the president? Okay, so let's start with this. The things we're going to look at. I'm going to review very quickly the idea of nullification, which is going to be really important because it gets to the center of what Jefferson believed. And then we're going to look at some of the instances that leads up to his presidency with the election of 1800, and then just 3 constitutional issues that he has to deal with as president. I would encourage you to take notes on this, whether you're taking review notes on the back of that sheet we used in class today, or in a notebook, or on the back of your Chapter 6, Section 3 reading notes. Just very quickly, we will have an assessment, kind of like a quiz test thing on Friday. It's not going to include Chapter 6, Section 4. It'll only be those first 3 chapters. The focus is going to be clearly on the start of the country, the Washington presidency, the Hamilton programs, Hamilton versus Jefferson, and then the transitions from Washington to Adams, Adams to Jefferson, and how Jefferson puts his philosophy into practice. So let's look at one of those key components of that philosophy, which is this idea of nullification. And let's just review nullification. Remember that Jefferson saw at the center the Constitution, and he viewed the Constitution as a contract. And each of the individual states, when they either ratified the Constitution or agreed to join the Union, they, in Jefferson's opinion, were agreeing to the terms of that contract, which meant the specific wording of the Constitution is what they were getting into, or what they were entering into. So Jefferson said the next logical step would be that the states should have some power if there's a violation or a breach of contract. So if the Congress, under the powers of the Constitution, were to pass a law that a state did not view as constitutional, the state should get to do something. They shouldn't just have to accept that. And so what Jefferson said in his Kentucky resolution was that, let's use the Alien and Sedition Acts as an example, or just the Sedition Act really. If the Congress passes the Sedition Act, which clearly violates the First Amendment, the state of Kentucky should have the right to say that law is null and void in Kentucky. If you want to enforce it in Massachusetts, feel free, but we're not going to enforce that law here because we view it as a violation of the contract. That's nullification. It is really significant because what Jefferson is suggesting is that the states do have kind of the ultimate trump power over the federal government. That is, the state would have the right to review laws and decide whether or not they were constitutional. And if they viewed them as being unconstitutional, they could choose not to enforce them in their state. That's a game changer because that really flips the balance of power. It takes the power of the Congress and says, we have all of this power, but only if the states say it's okay. And that's what Jefferson wanted. That would put the power squarely in the state. I apologize. I can tell already that this video is going to run a little bit longer, but I'm not going to make it to the 10 minutes today, but just bear with me. Another interesting thing about the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, but specifically the Kentucky resolution, is that its author, Thomas Jefferson, was also the Vice President of the United States. And so we have the Vice President versus the President in a matter of policy, in philosophy, and going into 1800, they would actually be against each other in the presidential election of 1800. If all things were equal, the Federalists probably would have been okay because they could have maintained the votes that they had in 1796. But not all things remain the same, and here's why. And this is new information. This is something that you would want to have in your notes. Hopefully you already have it in your reading notes. But there's a split in the Federalist Party. And at the center of this split are the 2 key people in the Federalist Party. The President of the United States, John Adams, and of course the most powerful Federalist, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton wanted to go to war with France. He wanted that war because he thought it would bring the United States legitimacy. He thought it would tell the rest of the world, you can't just mess with us whenever you want, you can't impress our sailors, things like that. Adams was worried that we might not be able to win that war, and if we lost the war with France, what happens to the United States? What would happen to our future? Would we become French colonies? What happens? And so Adams worked out a deal, last-minute deal, to avoid war with France. Truth be told, France didn't want to go to war with us because they had their hands full with England. And so it was mutually beneficial. And it worked out well for both sides. The only person that it really didn't work out very well for was Hamilton, because Hamilton was seeking that legitimacy, and Hamilton also believed that he would be the commander of this army that would defeat the French, and it would bring him even further glory, fame, and possibly power. So he's mad at Adams. He's mad at John Adams. And if you're the most powerful man in your party, and you're mad at the President of the United States, and that President of the United States is going to run for re-election, what do you do? What Hamilton chose to do is he chose to go and find another Federalist to run for president. And he goes and he finds somebody that he trusts a little bit more, a guy named Pinckney. And Pinckney is going to challenge for the presidency. Well, when you have a party that's split like this, what ends up happening for the opposition, the Democratic Republicans in this case, is they're in a position of power. If they can consolidate their votes, they have a real good opportunity to win that office. And it's here that I have to explain something that I explained in our last video, but now it means something. Remember the constitutional glitch I talked about, where first place became president, second place became vice president. Well, Thomas Jefferson had just sat as John Adams vice president for 4 years. He didn't want to have a Federalist vice president. In fact, he thought it was really possible that they might just switch offices. That wouldn't work out very well. They wouldn't be able to work that well together. And so with the split in the Federalist Party, the Democratic Republicans, Jefferson decides to go to New York, find this guy, Aaron Burr, ask him if he'd be interested in serving as vice president. They thought that this might deliver New York. It might make the Democratic Republican Party more of a national party, get them inroads into New York and maybe even New England. And it would, in the end, give them the power of both the presidency and the vice presidency. And so the Electoral College votes, and I'm not sure how well you can see this, but here are their results. Somebody in the Democratic Republicans screwed up and didn't cast their vote for Jefferson like they were supposed to. It was supposed to be 74 to 73, but instead they're tied. And what the Constitution says has to happen in this case is the top 3 electoral vote recipients have to go to the House of Representatives to compete for the presidency. Well, in this case, it would be Jefferson, Burr, and Adams. Now just think about this. If Hamilton has power, which he did, here are his choices. Jefferson, we know he is philosophically opposed to. Aaron Burr, we know where that story is going to end. Or John Adams, somebody who just made him very angry. Somebody who he's on political outs with. In the end, Jefferson and Hamilton come to an agreement that the people and the Electoral College chose the Democratic Republicans, and that Hamilton would tell the Federalists to vote for Jefferson. In exchange, Jefferson had to promise to leave the National Bank alone. Okay, this video is closing in on 9 minutes here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this and I'm going to make this part 1, okay? And as a matter of it being part 1, what I'll do is I'm going to make a second video, and that you can kind of consider that your Wednesday night video. So let's hope you watch this tonight, and then you can watch the second version or the second edition on Wednesday night, which will pick up on the decisions that Jefferson had to make as president. But this one's getting kind of long, and I don't want it to be too big of a file. Okay,